The crazy thing about fighting a war in Kandahar in 2009 is less about the violence, but more about the humanity you saw on the ground. We haven't been in Afghanistan for, 20 years. We were in Afghanistan 1 year, 20 times. West Point, unlike the modern Ivy League schools, two of which I attended. I have a degree from Columbia and I have a degree from Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania. West Point is a place where you come in and you're treated like a student that's going to lead people in combat one day. A leader who is not training early in their life to grapple with perspectives that oppose their own and learning to find nuance, to find common ground, to appreciate your intellectual adversary's point of view. If that's not a daily ritual at a young age, you're probably doing yourself a disservice.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chat Masala. Today, we have with us Rajiv Srinivasan, a very special guest. Rajiv got a start at the West Point Military Academy, where he majored in comparative politics and Arabic. After that, he was deployed in Afghanistan as a platoon leader, where he was awarded a Bronze Star for his service in Kandahar, Afghanistan. After that, he returned to the US and decided to join the corporate world, exploring seed startup sales and building a career in hyper-growth sales and global management in a matrixed environment from VMware to LinkedIn. Welcome, Rajiv.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. I remember meeting you at an event in Princeton. You were an officer in the US Army at that point, and I had never seen a fellow Indian in the US Army. So that was quite inspirational. And thank you so much for taking my questions after the talk. You really became a mentor to me. So it's wonderful to keep checking in and seeking life wisdom. Really want to get into some practical insights that young people can apply in their own lives. So would love to begin with your decision to join the US Army. And this is post 9/11 America. And it's not the first choice that an Indian family would have for their young boy. So how did that decision play out? And if you can share that story and how you convinced them.
I did not sign up for the Army like it was like some deep-seated ambition that I wanted to be an Army officer. I went to West Point, frankly, because I was looking for a source of free education. I was raised in the Appalachian Mountains outside of Roanoke, Virginia. And my parents, while they did exceedingly well later in life and have done, great things for themselves, but at the time, the cost of an Ivy League school was just astronomical. I mean, it's more astronomical today, but even though my ambition and my drive was like, hey, I want to get into the best school possible, I was coming from this very small town and I didn't have a lot of robust amenities to help me flourish into the person I thought I could be. I really had my heart set on like a really top tier private school. And then, I did happen to get into a couple. And when I saw those multiple zeros on the end of the tuition, values, I was like, I can't do this to my parents. And, I also in the back of my head, I was like, I can't do this to my little sister, because if they put all their financial eggs in this basket and my sister's coming up 3-4 years behind me applying to her college, like, I don't want to drain the pool of resources. So I started looking first at ROTC scholarships, and that led me to discovering West Point. It was at this point that my uncle, who had graduated from the Indian NDA, National Defense Academy, and was an Air Force officer, perked up when he heard the word West Point. My parents had no idea what it was. They thought it was just some random boot camp. And my uncle, like, oh my gosh, you got into West Point? That's like a huge deal. You got to let him go, etc. I don't think my parents were ever super opposed to me joining the military. I just think they didn't know what they didn't know. And I said, look, free college, guaranteed job coming out of it. What's not to love? And so I ended up going. And what I tell people is it's not why you go, it's why you stay. So at the Service Academy, you have the first 2 years of your experience there to actually decide if you want to be an Army officer. And if you leave within the first 2 years, no problem. Take your college credits and enjoy your life. Thanks for trying us out. But once you go to school, once you go to class on that first day of your third year, your junior year, you're locked in. It's a commitment that it is now enacted by you showing up on that first day of your junior year. And while I went for the free education and sort of let's just call it the economic benefits, what caused me to fall in love with the academy and my classmates and the experience and the idea of service was really this camaraderie that I felt with these people from all walks of life, from every corner of the United States, that were all on this campus to do one thing, and that was to serve our country. Looking back on that decision now, it was absolutely the best decision I ever made. And when I think about where our country, the United States, is right now and how divided we are and how we are not able to really speak with each other, we're kind of talking past each other. When I think back to the best, most well-rounded community of diverse thinkers that I've gotten to interact with that have shaped my worldviews, it has been and continues to be my classmates from West Point. It's a really unique and special place, and it's the foundation for everything I have today, quite frankly.
Can you speak a little bit more about the culture of West Point? Because I think most people wouldn't attribute the military to diversity, creativity, some of these qualities you mentioned. What are some misconceptions that you hope people would let go of when it comes to West Point and military institutions in general?
Look, I think that every institution, be it a private university, public university, or a military academy, is going to have its fallbacks. First, let's look at the intake, right? We're talking about, by design, by law, West Point has to source students from every single one of the 50 United States, right? So there will be someone from Nebraska. There will be someone from Kansas. There will be someone from California. There will be someone from New York. So geographic and therefore political ideologies are really diverse. Economic and socioeconomic status is really diverse as well, just by the nature of who has exposure to military culture in our country. So it offers a broad cross-section because we have very wealthy people, very poor people that all have exposure to this academy, that hear about it, that understand. And of course, it's a free education. So a lot of people are going to be interested in that it tends to be a little bit of a prestigious place. So I think from a geographic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, ideological diversity, the intake is actually really diverse in a way that I think a lot of people underestimate, because they're looking skin deep or they're looking clothing deep, namely that we're all wearing uniforms and walking in order. Yes. But at the end of the day, we actually think and operate and compute differently. We're all very unique and different people. The second, and I argue the absolute most important thing, is that West Point, unlike the modern Ivy League schools, two of which I attended, I have a degree from Columbia and I have a degree from Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania. West Point is a place where you come in and you're treated like a student that's going to lead people in combat one day. And I contrast that with attending an Ivy League school with a 11-figure endowment that in many cases treated me like I was kind of a prospective donor or a customer. That's something I would really challenge young people today when they go out and find their source of higher education. And it's actually the biggest fear I have for my two daughters that will one day go to college is I am worried they will attend an institution that treats them like a customer, not like a student that's going into a senior leadership position one day. And because of that, I was not given participation points for just raising my hand and stating my opinion. I was not rewarded for having a righteous opinion. I was challenged day in and day out by my professors, most of whom were actually other Army officers, for them to get me to think rigorously, critically. Every word, every nuance became heavy with the weight of consequence. And so words we learned mattered. The nuances mattered. And at the end of the day, we had to learn to communicate with each other. And when you have a sort of mission-driven institution where you're treated as a leader, not as a customer, you were able to develop yourself into someone that is far more capable and nuanced and well-equipped to handle the challenges of modern leadership than, say, if you just go to a place that, whether you think it or feel it in the moment, is kind of curating your experience for your future value.
Can you dig a little deeper into that? I think this is really interesting. This is definitely something that modern elite institutions must reflect on. What does that mean on the ground? What does it look like for a college to treat students like customers as opposed to future leaders? And what do you suggest, the likes of Columbia and Wharton might change to become even better?
If I had to really dive into it, what I would probably say is that I think a lot of these institutions rely on their rigorous admissions process to get in. And we can go down a deep rabbit hole about how the Ivy League admissions process is really inequitable. And quite frankly, it's not endorsing a meritocracy. It's actually really not doing that much for diversity of thought. But I mean, there are also tons of research articles that kind of show the degree of out of control growth of the modern Ivy League endowment. It is just insane. And these are, funds that are, for the most part, growing tax-free. The most despicable thing is the student bodies of these elite universities haven't expanded at all. The actual number of professors haven't really expanded at all. The number one thing that expands over the past 20 years that drives our tuitions up is actually administrative staff. Right? It is people running programs and running policy centers and things that have nothing to do with education. I think it's not so much what happens in the classroom, right? My experience at Wharton and Columbia, and I guarantee you all of the folks that are going to Ivy League schools at an individual level, they're all incredibly bright, incredibly talented, and probably being pushed rigorously in that isolated ecosystem that is their classroom environment. The interesting thing isn't so much what happens in the classroom, it's what's going on in the boardroom. It's what's going on outside. What is the ultimate aim of that institution, and where do you see their funds and their resources going? When I was at West Point, the funds and resources and the high degree of scrutiny by every senator and member of Congress, let alone the general staff, was to make sure that every single one of our cadets was getting prepared to fight a war. Right? And that level of scrutiny and immediate practical use case, it shed waste, it shed distraction. It made sure that professors weren't out on speaking engagements and publishing books. It made sure they were in the classroom making us better. It made sure that the administration wasn't funding, crazy initiatives on the side that were appealing to, let's just say, public interests. They were focused on funding initiatives that were about creating the best class of Army officers that we could possibly create. And so what does it look like? It looks like an institution where education and academia actually looks, if you look at how the institution runs, it gives the flavor of an institution where academic quality and rigor, let's just say a extracurricular activity, not the main effort.
Got it. No, I think these are great points. Basically, the immediacy of the challenge faced by young cadets leads to their being more focused, right? They need to develop that rigor of thought and that discipline because there can be severe consequences of any lapse in training. So the whole institution is dedicated to providing a quality education, both academically and practically for the battlefield. And maybe some of that needs to rub off on traditional four-year universities like the Ivies.
I would like that personally. It's something that I actually am scared for and I see it. Both my wife and I attended, some prestigious schools, some Ivy League schools, and just the number of calls and emails I get to ask for money for this endowment, donate for this. I'm like, man, UPenn right now is like a $14 billion endowment. Like you could send everybody to school for free, build a new dorm, and still have money left over. Is this really the best use of my charitable dollar? And I feel like a customer. And when I think back to a lot of my experiences, how many Ivy League schools now just have like pass fail, just show up and you're good, to the point where it's like you can make it through the entire multi-year program and barely have to try, really phone it in. I hear about it at med schools and law schools.
Wow, even med schools, that's quite troubling.
Several of our close friends are physicians, and they notice their incoming class, attending physicians looking at their residents. Academic rigor, right? That's really what we're circling around. Academic intellectual rigor is something that, in my opinion, is lacking in our conversations, in our value systems as societies. And I think the consequences are dire in the long term for our strategic advantage.
Let's take a turn here. Would love for you to talk about your experience in Afghanistan. I think you won a medal for your feats in Kandahar. What was that like, and what were the broader life and leadership lessons you extracted from that experience? I hope you're enjoying this episode of Chat Masala. Before we move on with this insightful conversation, please be sure to subscribe and follow us so we can continue expanding our minds together.
Yeah, the crazy thing about fighting a war in Kandahar in 2009 is less about the violence, but more about the humanity you saw on the ground. And that's really, I think, the most important things that I'm taking away from that year in Afghanistan was going through these villages. And keep in mind, we were dressed like RoboCop, right? I was a conventional officer, meaning that I wasn't special forces. I wasn't, wearing cool bandanas and baseball caps and growing beards. I looked like RoboCop. I was a conventional combat arms officer, had a huge helmet, huge sunglasses, huge rifle, wearing, army issued boots and camo gear and carrying a huge pack around. And we'd walk around these villages where, 80% of the time, nothing's going on. And you're trying to prepare for that 20% of the time, or even 10% of the time where something catastrophic is going to happen. And so when you're walking around and you engage with these people, they were just so human, right? So normal, so kind, and in many cases, very gentle. And it's a culture that had almost become desensitized to the presence of an outside military force. Afghanistan as a nation at various points in its history has been taken over by the Greeks, the Persians, the Mongols, the British, the Russians, the Americans. Like it is just a laundry list of global entrants that have walked the mountains and the deserts of Afghanistan. And so when we come around trying with our show of force, right, it doesn't really affect them. Like it's in their culture. They're like, okay, we get it.
They're like, here's another one. That's a great point. It began with Alexander, I guess, and retreating from India and Afghanistan, and this whole series of empires retreated from Afghanistan. So you're saying that's part of the culture. They're like, okay, another will come and go.
Exactly. I really felt that. And keep in mind, even within that strategic short-lived occupation, within just the American occupation, American Army officers and American Army units go for 1 year at a time, right? My deployment was for a year. So basically what we tell people is we haven't been in Afghanistan for 20 years. We were in Afghanistan 1 year, 20 times. Right? Because every one of those years, the leadership, the, local contacts on the ground, we did handovers and I went home, right? And somebody else had to deal with the person, that tribal elder. And so that tribal elder that I worked with, he had seen 20 of me come and go. Isn't that ridiculous? And so there's this constant changeover, in addition to just changeover of empire, changeover of individual units. And it just left us both sides of the table on the negotiating table. We're just like, what are we doing here? And so I think what I ended up taking away from Afghanistan, in addition to understanding what human nature can do in incredibly dangerous and difficult circumstances, I also learned to really read the room and understand the depths of skepticism and complication between these like really important and difficult problems we're all trying to solve, right? Righteousness is not a path to anything but self-indulgence. And I think even within, some circles of the Army, there are people that righteously believe that I will accomplish this mission on the backs of my own shoulders. I will carry this war. And I just found that incredibly self-defeating. But the problem isn't actually that statement that I'm going to shoulder this entire task and burden. It's the desensitization of your adversaries or another party's inputs into that calculation. Right? It's the blinders that are the problem, not the motivation, right? It's the blinders. Let's say this person says, I'm going to carry this on my back. I'm going to do it. And they sit down and they're like, okay, what do I need you to embrace American democracy so that you can keep the Taliban out for the next terrorist attack, right? If you don't actually sit down and take off that righteousness, take off that blinders and learn to see the world through someone else's worldview, through someone else's eyes, all that motivation and gravitas just goes to waste, right? It's just self-defeating. And so if you're going to have that calling, that mission-driven mentality, that's absolutely beautiful. I envy people with that kind of calling, particularly in their professional life. But what I found missing in many circumstances, particularly at senior ranking levels, was the ability to open their ears to what the Afghan people, what the Afghan population, politicians and local tribal elders were saying and telling us, and trying to, see the world from their point of view. What it must have been like to be a generational tribal elder, seeing swaths of Army officers and units come and go over the past 10 years, 20 years, seeing different Russian units come through, seeing war after war after war. Yeah, we didn't hear that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And, this is something we talk to our young people about all the time, that, if you have the privilege to go to the U.S. and study at an elite institution, it is your responsibility to engage with people very different from you. And I think that is the first step and a critical step to overcoming some of those divisions you spoke of before. What insights did you garner? I'm really curious. When you spoke with tribal elders who had seen a generation of military officers 1 year at a time, and what was that humanity you took back to the U.S. after your deployment?
The one thing that they all see when they see an Army officer walking around is they see dollar signs. They see someone's checkbook, right? And I remember effectively, you're 22, right? When you're out there leading these units. I didn't know anything. I had never had any real world practical experience. And I went to the academy where I didn't even do my own laundry for 4 years, right? Despite being a very well-trained tactical leader, I had very little human instinct, street smarts. And when they see dollar signs, they're like, oh my gosh, this local company commander for the Afghan unit is like, oh, Lieutenant Srinivasan, my generator's broken. Can you go and figure out if you guys can get $500 for us to fix the generator? I'm an Army officer and I got a budget, and I'm like, sweet, no problem. I'll go ask. I'm going to win this guy's heart and mind. Literally, I'm going to win this guy's heart and mind. And then I go back and I get $500 and I give him $500 and the generators never get fixed, right? And, yeah, you just learn. And this happened to me time and time again. And my heart gets broken. And you go through the 7 stages of grief or 5 days, whatever. And you stay in that anger stage for a long time. Getting to acceptance was like, what would I do if I were in that guy's shoes? I probably would have done the same thing. I'm not that much better than that guy. If I had seen generations of, Army lieutenants come and go, if I had been, paid a really measly wage to live in this random desert and not really have much of a defined mission or defined end state, of course, and that end state and whatever mission I have, whatever semblance of a mission I have is imposed by some random Western country 6,000 miles away. Yeah, I'd probably be a little bit disgruntled. I might, try and put a few bucks in my pocket. I'm not above that. I don't know. I haven't been in that situation. Who am I to judge? And so to get to that point of acceptance, I really had to peer into that person's worldview. And so bringing that back out, and this is a problem that I see a lot of today, is that righteousness, the inability for people to grapple with opposing viewpoints. We have this idea right now that if people don't agree with us, they're evil. right? And I'm not talking, it goes on all sides of political ideology. It's socioeconomic status. I see this left and right. If we don't agree with each other, the other person is evil, is stupid. I'm obviously right. There's no use engaging with this person. They probably don't know what they're talking about. I'm just going to stay in my silo, believe what I believe. And everyone that is not on team, Rajiv is wrong. And I see it, if I can be completely honest, I actually think many elite institutions inculcate this behavior. And we've grown into a culture where ideas are threatening, right? Where words are threatening. And look, I'm not saying that words aren't powerful, but ideas and questions and, arguments inherently by themselves, without being backed by the rule of law and being backed by like some immediate consequence, like the right answer isn't to just silence a person, but is to engage and ask thoughtful questions. And I have fallen victim to that trap too, where I have felt like someone who has disagreed with me is just flat out wrong, flat out evil, doesn't get it. And more often than not, when I actually engage that person in like a substantive conversation, I might just walk away with one little tidbit, one little ounce of nuance that helps me see their world just slightly better. And I might still vigorously believe what I believe, and that person might vigorously believe what they believe. No one's mind has changed. But that little overlap of gray, that little overlap of empathy, that is what progress looks like. That is where decisions get made. That is where that's where love is found, and that's where unity is found. And we don't have enough of that right now. And so by going through that process as a young man and feeling swindled, feeling co-opted by this, Afghan army officer, it took me on a journey where I learned to see the world through that person's eyes, someone who is potentially even my adversary, let alone just a stranger. And I use that skill every day to do my job. And I think it's led to a lot of success.
Can we talk about that? How do you apply this principle that you learned in Kandahar in your corporate career at LinkedIn today, or when have you used it since?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's every day, right? Look, whenever you're building a business, I work in technology sales and I've done several startups. And so my skill set is working in sales, business development, the occasional fundraising operation, et cetera. And inherent to that job is talking with people whose email address domain does not match your own, right? You're talking to people outside of your organization. And whenever you go to prepare for how are we going to communicate a message? How are we going to win over someone as either a customer, an investor, a partner, whatever your objective is, you got to sit there with a team and make a decision on what is the strategy. What are we going to ask for? How are we going to make the best impression of ourselves? And you better believe it gets heated because not all people think alike. And people have different experiences. People have different worldviews. People come from different cultures and backgrounds. And I have absolutely almost every day sit in meetings where I disagree about the strategy that I'm taking forward with our business. And by having a diverse group, a kitchen cabinet of, if you will, of people to challenge my ideas, to say, hey, you're doing this wrong, and this is why. Maybe I won't agree all the time. Maybe I won't change all my decisions, but you know what? I have a lot more nuance in the way I communicate and execute my decisions, having been sensitized to the diverse perspectives around me and having built teams with diverse perspectives around me. And oh, by the way, diversity isn't just, skin tones. Diversity of people who look all differently, but all think alike is not diversity, right? It's got to be people who, yes, have different lived shared experiences. Oftentimes those differences in lived experiences are a symptom of having a different racial or ethnic background. But having that racial or ethnic background in and of itself, that level of diversity in and of itself is not what I value. What I value is the diverse perspectives and opinions that are brought to the table, or nuances and different worldviews that are coming to the table as a result of that, surface level diversity. A leader who is not training early in their life to grapple with perspectives that oppose their own and learning to find nuance, to find common ground, to appreciate your intellectual adversary's point of view. If that's not a daily ritual at a young age, you're probably doing yourself a disservice.
I love that. And this, I think, may tie back to our conversation about Ivy League institutions and what they need to do to prepare young people to become leaders in the real world. In addition to this one, in addition to engaging positively, productively, sometimes disagreeing, but finding, I like what you said, finding that gray area, that nuance. In addition to this, what other skills do you want young people to develop on war footing in this day and age?
Yeah. And not for nothing, I think a lot of these skills, whether it's the ability to grapple with intellectual adversaries and the skills I'll talk about in a moment, I think it's not wise to depend on an academic institution to train you in them, right? A lot of these most important life skills are things that you got to go out and work on your own. So let me offer a couple things. Number one is digital discipline. The number of people I see walking around just glued to their phones, engaging purely on social media, responding to notifications constantly, it drives me bananas, right? We are human beings. This device is not, it is your constant portal to the outside world. It prevents you from being in the moment and living life as it's meant to be lived, which is distraction-free in the moment with the people you love, with tasks that inspire you. And so I would say the number one skill, I think, for young people coming up right now is learning how to turn that phone off, learning when to put it away, learning how to turn off your notifications, learning which apps are necessary and which apps are absolutely value-destroying apps, and take them off your phone. I have rid myself of 99% of the most common distraction apps out there, and I'm very glad for it. Tend to read books almost exclusively as opposed to blog posts, or I definitely don't go through social media feeds. I think learning to manage your relationship with technology is going to be vital because, at the end of the day, a lot of these apps are free. And if you are not paying for the product, you are the product. Their job is to keep you engaged in that session so they can put another ad in front of your face. So you engage a little bit more so they can go sell more ads to their next customer. I am doing my best to not be a product to be sold. And so it's something that I care about with my kids a lot is we try our absolute best to limit screen time, to limit their exposure to advertisements, and let them learn to think independently and enjoy this beautiful world they have around them.
I need to ask you this because this is an argument I get into with students, but also some younger team members. What's your judgment on video games? On one hand, is it like social media, or some people say they're esports, watching video games? I don't get that, but watching video games is the same as watching sports. Your take, Rajiv.
Yeah, that's super funny. So to be honest, I don't play video games. I haven't played video games since I was 6 years old. I'm 37 right now. So I have gone 3 decades without owning or playing on a video game console. So I don't know if I'm actually the right, if my opinion matters.
They have improved a little bit in 3 decades, I have heard.
Yeah, they look incredible. What I would guess is that video games, to my knowledge, you're doing something over the course of you could be playing a game with the same people over the course of an hour, right? And I actually see a lot of value in that because especially think about pandemic lockdowns, right? And we live in a really socially isolating society. And to have the opportunity to work constructively on a single, call it a project, even though it's a game, over the course of several hours and demanding your focus, your creativity, your communication, like I actually see a lot of value in that. Now, I would much prefer, my daughters go, play a game of soccer or something with their friends outside and get a little exercise in, get some sunlight. But on the spectrum, I actually don't find that, evil in and of itself. Video games, I think, have a lot to offer when used in the right context and for the right reasons. What I'm really addressing here is the drone scroll, right? The mindless social media scroll where your mind isn't really being asked to be creative. You're not being asked to communicate. You're not asked to solve intricate problem to do this video game, but you're just drone scrolling mindlessly through your social media feeds and your TikToks for hours. That's what's evil. And that there's a big difference between the two. Does that resonate at all?
Understood. Sorry. I'm open to changing my opinion on video games henceforth.
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So on one hand, I feel that I think my take is that there are so many big problems out there, and young people have immense energy and creativity. I would love to see how exactly what you talked about, this insane capacity for collaborative problem solving could be leveraged to the real world. What might be very interesting, perhaps a business idea, is taking real world challenges and translating them into a video game for young people to solve, and then those can just be translated back into the real world. That's where I'm at. I'm kind of in two minds.
Say then that, why should people play physical sports when they should go like build a school or, take all that physical energy and apply it elsewhere?
This is why I'm in two minds. I don't have a good response for how video games are fundamentally different from basketball, besides the exercise point, which is a strong point.
Which, by the way, if we're going to continue the conversation on skills, wrapping your head around your physical health. Something that I actually would say in the Indian community and definitely in the Indian diaspora here in the United States that
this is something that the Indian community has to work on with much more focus.
Oh my God, dude. Like the level of diabetes and cancer that I have seen. I had a wake up call a couple of years ago. So I've lost like 3 uncles now to varying courses of cancer, varying types of cancer. And my father has had his share of health issues as well. And just like left and right, as India has westernized and as the Indian diaspora in the United States has grown wealthier and has, of course, adopted a Western leaning diet, we have seen our health as a community just completely go to crap. And it really is a wake up call for me because I have 2 daughters. I know I keep on saying this, but I think what you'll discover, and this is far different from when we were in Princeton a decade ago, getting to know each other, but like having children like really has opened my eyes to a whole different level of concern, right? And it's not just a logical one, it's an emotional one. And just my physical health is screaming to me in the sense of like, I need to keep this my mind and my body sharp so that when I have grandkids, I want to pick them up and play with them so that I can not be a financial or emotional burden to my children when I get older. And so knowing that in the modern world, if you're in, let's just say you're among them relatively privileged people who are, living in a country where you have access to modern medicine and clean water and all that good stuff, it is not out of the question for someone to live for 80 to even 100 years, right? So I'm 37. I'm nowhere even halfway done. And I'm not even halfway done with my career. Isn't that crazy? I feel so seasoned, and yet I still have far long before I'm going to retire. And, getting your head wrapped around the fact that life is a marathon. It is a 100-year marathon, not a sprint. And whether it's your relationship with alcohol, processed foods, physical fitness, and just even your emotional health, the things that affect you physically, your stress levels, really, learning to rein that in at a relatively early age has been life-changing. And I feel younger today because of some of those changes than I did even 3 to 5 years ago.
Can you walk us through that? Maybe in the context of your daily routine, from the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep. How do you structure your day? A day in the life of Rajiv Srinivasan.
When you have children, young children, I have a 2-year-old and an infant, you structure your day around childcare, right? Childcare is like the godsend because it's like you're 40 hours a week. We're privileged enough where I have a nanny to watch my daughters. And so it gives me 40 hours a week of effectively productivity that I can count on, where I can do things like talk on your podcast. But my day typically starts around 4 or 5 a.m. where I'm taking my youngest daughter, my infant daughter, and giving her a morning feeding. And around 6 a.m., my second daughter wakes up. And I love my life right now because I got to tell you, even though it's an early morning, I get about 3 hours of quality time with my 2 daughters every morning. And it gives a chance for my wife to sleep in a little bit. I make coffee with them. We read books, and it's play. It's unstructured play. And it's something that when I think back to my childless days, I would cut on my email and I would kind of plug in. I might throw in an audiobook or a podcast, or, I would start processing outside of the 4 walls of my home immediately. And now what I think is cool is I'm very present and in the moment, because a kid can tell when you're not in the moment. They're going to pester you and badger you. And especially with a 2-year-old, if you fall out of the moment too long and you don't give them the attention, they're going to do something mischievous. So it's a forcing function to stay in the moment. 9 a.m., the nanny comes. I typically go for my workout at 9 a.m., first thing in the morning. I live on the East Coast. I work for West Coast companies. Most of them are still at home doing with the family if they're even awake. So what that means for me is I get, some quiet email hours where I can go and do my run. I happen to live on the water. I'm on a lake. And so sometimes I do some paddleboarding or whatnot. I'll just try and get my physical fitness done early in the day. Show me someone's calendar and I'll show you their priorities, right? And I literally block it out in my calendar. I'm going to go work out at 9 a.m. And then from 10 to the rest of the business day, it's sporadic meetings with clients, with my people that I manage. I try my best to really limit my travel. Travel to me was actually a real instigator of some bad behaviors, eating out, eating a lot of processed foods, indulging with clients or customers. Or even teammates. I try my best to take my meetings on Zoom if I can and limit my travel. And if I have to get on a plane, I will, but I do my very best not to. And then of course, 5 p.m. comes along. It's a lot more time with my kids, take care of the household tasks. I have a relatively simple life. I play music, I read, I write, I play a lot of sports in the evenings. Once a week, I try and do either a mountain bike ride in the summer or a ski. But really getting that physical fitness in and doing it in a quality way where I'm immersed in nature. There are 2 things that I actually did that really helped me out these past 2 years. One, I went sober about 2 years ago, and sobriety has been incredibly empowering. Knowing when I feel the need to escape, mindlessly trying to take in alcohol and feel that sense of lightheartedness, learning to recognize that emotion, that void, and recognizing that actually I'm dealing with something emotional right now and I want to drink to try and escape. Or I'm feeling a feeling of celebration, or I'm feeling, oh, wow, summer's here. It's hot. It's on the deck. Nothing would taste better than a glass of white wine. But just recognizing in that moment that I'm hunting for a feeling that is actually not truly necessary. And going sober has been incredible. Giving up alcohol has been the best decision ever. And I think I see sobriety being something that's more and more adopted and common in younger people. I'm actually really encouraged by that. I think prior generations Indian and American alike, have had some real problems with alcohol indulgence. And so I'm really glad about that. And the other thing I did is I went vegan, plant-based. I was raised vegetarian. When I was in the Army, I ate a lot of meat. And then a few years ago, I went vegan. And going plant-based has had incredibly beneficial effects on my health and well-being. I'm just generally eating like a lot less processed foods, getting in a ton of vegetables. Your body's a temple, what you put into it matters. And so I feel like I'm taking far better care of myself in that regard.
Lovely. We've got some rapid fire questions to kind of wind down. I know you touched upon this, but if you had to crystallize, what are 3 skills young people should focus on developing today?
Empathy, the ability to empathize with your intellectual adversary. Can you empathize and see the world from their view? Learning to manage your relationship with technology will have a direct effect on your happiness. These devices and these applications are not there to make us happy. They're made to make other people money. I think if you can wrap your head around the limits that you want technology to have in your life and in your family culture, I think that's going to be incredibly important. And then third, I would actually say is journaling and self-reflection. One thing that these devices and social media apps do is they actually take away our ability and our time to process and have us react to the numerous things that happen to us on a daily basis, some of which can actually be in a small degree traumatic, perhaps with a little t, but having a lifelong impact on us from, and we're still very young people, and being able to process that and put these experiences into their nuanced boxes so that we can take from those experiences what we need and what will make us better and stronger, but leave behind the things that are toxic. That's a really important thing that takes time and a conscious effort to go through. It's healing. And so journaling, meditation, self-reflection, seeing a therapist. I am, generally speaking, a really healthy person right now, but yet every 2 weeks I have an hour with a therapist. And I love it because invariably, particularly in a house with 2 young children under the age of 2, under the age of 3, I have crazy stressors. I also, have a small business. I work a full-time job, got a lot of things going on. And being able to talk through some of those stresses with someone who can ask me really insightful questions and get me to see the world differently has been really great. Making sure that you are taking care of your digital discipline, making sure you're taking care of your processing and self-reflection in the void of all that time that you're getting back because you're not spending them on social media. And then I'll double down on that call for health. What good is it making all the money that you ever dreamed you could have if a few years later you don't have the health capacity to really enjoy it? Health is happiness. And so really focus on.
Lovely. I know you mentioned books a couple of times, and we can see your amazing bookshelf behind. Can you share with us some of the works that have had a profound influence on you, that you the books that you often gift to others?
Sure. In a professional context, I gift the book Give and Take quite a bit. Give and Take is a book written by Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton. And I think it really talks a little bit about the unwritten rules of organizational behavior. There's kind of incentive structures that are on paper, whether it's a commission plan, a stock plan, a salary, benefits, etc. And then there's the innate understanding of connected interests. And understanding that collective interests and our personal interests are more often than not, aligned. And when you go out of your way to help someone as a giver, you often find the returns of that investment come back to you. It may not be in a structured way, but it's a way that is, of course, valuable. And reading that book really inspired a lot of how I engage at work, the things that I choose to care about and choose not to care about, and my expectations of my friends and colleagues and who I want to work with. So Give and Take by Adam Grant is a really phenomenal one. I also really enjoy the book How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. It's a book about the study of psychedelics. And my favorite thing about the book isn't the fact that it's a book about psychedelics, although that's an incredibly fascinating topic, but it's the way he, catalogs this really taboo sort of topic from a chemistry perspective, a neuroscience perspective, a sociological perspective, a political perspective, and across multiple decades from the 1900s all the way to modern day. It is one of the most interesting and well-researched and inspiring books I've ever read. And it really taught me at a meta level how I want to think about a given debate or a given issue at any given point. I want to have the complexity and versatility of analysis to look at issues from multiple lenses. And I think that's what Michael Pollan really taught me in that book.
Oh, that sounds great. Excellence is blank. How do you complete that?
Excellence is relative to ourselves, right? Steph Curry, a wonderful basketball player in the United States, has this, and it's actually something that I heard from I believe my father and other mentors, but never count another man's money. Comparison is the root of all disappointment. I think when we think about excellence in terms of the outside of what's external to us, I think we tend to miss the mark and tend to find that we work on things and work on problems that either A, aren't actually what make us happy, or B, cause us to spend far too many resources in one domain where they could be better used perhaps in other domains. To me, excellence is relative. It's relative to who you are today and who you want to be tomorrow. I think if we think about excellence in terms of that context, who we are today, who we want to be tomorrow, and whether we're making progress, that to me is excellence.
Lovely. Final question, which we ask all our guests. What's one change you wish to see in the world a decade from now, in 2035, let's say?
Oh, dear. We've got a lot of those. I would love to see climate change start reversing. I would love to see the free market start valuing more nuanced debate and perspectives. The concept of the free market is something that if you work in the private sector and you tend to adopt a capitalist attitude, we tend to use the free market as a bit of a crutch intellectually and a bit of a crutch in terms of like why things are the way they are. Well, it's because the free market has dictated them so. Well, if you allow, say, a highly addictive drug, like, say, cocaine, to be legalized, and does the free market really say that cocaine is the best thing since sliced bread if demand skyrockets because we're all addicted? No, right? There's a way where we can take the consumer's judgment and extract it from the marketplace such that the results of the free market are actually not what is truly valuable and what is really the best interests of ourselves and society. And I think we've reached that sort of point. I think that addiction metaphor actually reigns true when it comes to news media and digital media more broadly. I think we are addicted to vitriol. We are addicted to feeling righteous. We are addicted to our enemies feeling pain. And I think we need to start breaking that addiction. And I really hope that this upcoming generation, which in my opinion might be incredibly righteous, but in a way that's also very compassionate. I've never seen young people so staunchly advocating for their LGBTQ or their ethnic minority or racial minority counterparts. I've never seen a generation so, united by issues like gun violence. I mean, gun violence in schools today is just incredible. This young generation right now that's like in their late high schools, the folks that you mentor, like at least here in the United States, they're some of the most inspiring people I have ever met. And I'm really hopeful that they, as they get some life experience and go through, they're go through the trials and tribulations of life. They're going to get some nuance, and they're going to take that passion and that heart that they have, and they're going to start applying it to people that they don't agree with. And that's really my big hope, because if this generation can do that, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Lovely. No, here's to that. Rajiv, thank you again so much. This is a wonderful conversation. And I hope that everyone listening has really imbibed your life experiences and principles, and will act on them so we can see that future you talk about. Thank you again.